The early morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the old barn, casting long shadows across the wooden beams. Elijah Carter had already begun his daily rounds, tending to the cattle and checking the fences. The winter chill of the Montana Territory, 1883, bit at his skin, but he had grown used to it over the years. He was a man who valued hard work, solitude, and the quiet life he had built on his ranch. Yet, this morning, as he approached the barn, something felt different. A slight noise from above caught his attention. He looked up to find a child staring down at him from the loft, eyes wide with fear. The boy couldn't have been more than 6, with dirt smudged across his face and a wild look in his eyes. Elijah froze, sensing the danger in the boy's gaze. The child stepped closer, his small hand gripping the edge of the loft, as if preparing to flee. "Please, mister," the boy whispered urgently. "If they come looking, you have to hide my mama. Promise me." Elijah's brow furrowed. He knew trouble when he saw it, and this boy's eyes told a story of pain and fear. As he stepped closer, Elijah's gaze shifted to the loft where he saw the woman. Anna Murphy, her face bruised, her clothes ragged, holding an infant in her arms. She was breathing heavily, her eyes darting around nervously as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "Over my dead body," Elijah said, his voice low and firm. He didn't know who she was or why she was hiding, but he knew one thing for sure. No one was going to hurt her on his land. The boy seemed to shrink back, as if he understood that Elijah wasn't a man to be easily moved. But his fear was too deep to ignore. He stepped aside, allowing Elijah to climb up into the loft. The sight that greeted him was worse than he had imagined. Anna's face was covered in bruises, and her clothes barely kept her warm in the bitter cold. Her baby, Grace, was wrapped tightly in a blanket, her tiny body trembling. "Please," Anna whispered, her voice breaking. "We just need one night. I'll leave at first light, I swear. Please." Elijah's heart twisted. He could see that she wasn't lying, but he had no idea who was chasing her or why. But one thing was clear. She and her children were running from something far worse than the cold. He could feel it in his bones. As Elijah looked at the woman and her children, his thoughts raced. He had a daughter, Lily, back at the house. He knew how hard it was to keep her safe in a world so full of danger, but this was different. This woman had nowhere to go, no one to protect her. And Elijah, a man who had lost his wife years ago, couldn't help but see a bit of Sarah in Anna's desperate plea. But there was a risk. Elijah had worked hard to keep his ranch safe, to maintain the peace of his quiet life. He knew that by helping her, he could be putting everything he had worked for in jeopardy. Yet, in that moment, as Anna's frightened eyes met his, something inside him shifted. "You're safe here. No one touches you or those children." "Over my dead body," Elijah said, his voice thick with emotion. Anna hesitated, her eyes filled with doubt. She had heard promises like this before, from men who only wanted something in return. But she had no choice. There was nowhere else to turn. With a trembling sigh, Anna nodded. "Thank you." Elijah helped her down from the loft, careful not to hurt her any further. As they made their way toward the back entrance of the house, Anna's son, Thomas, stayed close to her, his small hand gripping her skirts. His protective stance only further confirmed the danger they were running from. Once inside, Elijah gave Anna food, blankets, and medical supplies for her injuries. He told her to rest while he took care of the children. As he moved through the house, preparing a place for them to stay, he caught a glimpse of his daughter, Lily, standing in the doorway. "Who are they?" Lily asked, her voice quiet but curious. "They're just passing through," Elijah said. "We'll help them for tonight." Lily looked at the strangers with a mix of curiosity and concern. She had grown up learning to trust her father's judgment, but something about this woman and her children made Lily uneasy. Yet, she did as she was told and quietly left to get ready for bed. As the night went on, Anna shared what little she could about her past. Her husband, James Murphy, had been killed 3 months ago by men she had once trusted. Now, those same men were after her and her children. Anna's voice trembled as she spoke of Dutch Calloway, the gang leader who believed she owed him for her husband's debt. And that debt, she said, was her. She showed Elijah a crumpled wanted poster. The words, "Wanted, Anna Murphy, theft of property," boldly printed across the top. Elijah frowned as he read it. The charges were clearly false, but that didn't matter to Dutch. To him, Anna was simply another piece of property to be claimed. "We can't stay here forever," Anna said quietly. "Dutch won't stop until he finds me." But Elijah only shook his head. "You're safe here. For now." The weight of the promise hung heavy between them. Anna wasn't sure she could trust him yet, but she had no other choice. Her family's future now rested on the kindness of a stranger. As the night wore on, Elijah found himself sitting in front of the fire, lost in thought. He couldn't help but wonder how long they would be safe. And more importantly, how far Dutch would go to get what he wanted. The sound of hooves approaching in the distance broke his thoughts, and Elijah's heart sank. It was only a matter of time before Dutch Calloway came looking for them. But for now, he could offer them shelter. And maybe that would be enough. As Elijah stared out into the darkened night, the sound of galloping horses grew louder. A voice from the distance carried in the wind. "We're looking for a woman and 2 children. $100 reward." The days following Anna and her children's arrival passed slowly, with the tension of impending danger hanging in the air. Elijah tried to carry on with his normal routine, but the weight of the promise he made to Anna pressed heavily on him. The ranch, once a place of solitude and peace, now felt like a ticking time bomb. Anna, though still wary, did her best to earn her keep. She cooked meals, mended clothes, and helped around the house, her movements hesitant but determined. Thomas, ever the protector, followed Elijah everywhere, eager to learn the ways of the ranch, while Lily, with her quiet curiosity, formed a bond with him. It was the beginning of something they all needed, a momentary respite from the chaos that had become their lives. But there were moments when the quiet would be shattered by the sound of hooves or the rustling of trees, and Elijah's heart would race with fear. Then, one day, Cooper, the ranch hand, returned from town, his face drawn with worry. He had overheard men at the saloon asking questions, their descriptions matching Anna and her children. And then, the name that struck fear into Elijah's heart. Dutch Calloway was coming to the territory with a federal marshal at his side. The law was no longer on their side, and the danger was closer than ever. Anna, upon hearing the news, immediately began packing, her face pale with fear. But when Thomas cried, begging not to leave, Elijah knew they couldn't run anymore. "You're not running anymore," he told Anna firmly, blocking the door. There was no escape now, only a stand. Elijah gathered the ranch hands, offering them the choice to leave or stay and fight. All 3 chose loyalty, and they began preparing for the worst, barricading windows, checking rifles, and getting ready for a confrontation. Anna, still shaken, watched from the sidelines, guilt growing in her heart. She wasn't used to depending on anyone, but the men's loyalty was something she could neither deny nor refuse. The preparations were interrupted by the sight of 3 riders approaching at dusk. Pike, Dutch's enforcer, and 2 gunmen rode up to the gate, their presence a clear message. Pike, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, asked politely about Anna, mentioning the reward. Elijah stood firm, refusing to let them in, but the underlying threat was clear. "Mr. Calloway knows you're lying," Pike said, his eyes scanning the ranch. "He just wants to see if you're smart enough to change your mind." That night, after the riders left, Elijah and Anna sat by the fire, tending to baby Grace, who had fallen ill with a fever. The quiet conversations they shared were filled with unspoken emotions. Elijah talked about his late wife, Sarah, and Anna shared memories of her life before James. Their shared grief was a bond neither had expected to find. But in the midst of all this fear, it felt like a flicker of hope. But that hope was fleeting. As dawn broke, Anna looked out the window, her heart sinking. A dozen riders were approaching on horseback, and with them came the man who had haunted her every step. Dutch Calloway had arrived with his full gang. The fight for their lives was about to begin. Dutch Calloway arrived at the ranch with a chilling calmness that only added to his dangerous aura. His reputation preceded him, and Elijah knew that the man was not to be underestimated. Calloway, in his early 40s, was well-dressed and spoke with a polite, educated tone that contrasted sharply with the ruthless nature of his actions. As he dismounted from his horse, the riders behind him stayed in formation, a subtle reminder of the power he wielded. Dutch casually approached the front door. Alone, his presence a calculated move to intimidate Elijah into submission. When he reached the porch, he raised his hand in a gesture of civility, though his eyes betrayed his true intent. "Mr. Carter," he said smoothly, "I believe we need to talk." Elijah stood firm at the door, his jaw set, knowing that nothing good could come from this conversation. The air between them was thick with tension, each man aware of the other's strength. But only one could walk away from this encounter unharmed. Dutch wasted no time with pleasantries. "I'm a reasonable man, Mr. Carter," he began, his voice dripping with false kindness. "You've been harboring my property, and I'm here to negotiate." Elijah's hand tightened around the doorframe. He knew what Dutch wanted. "Anna." "I'm not selling," Elijah replied, his tone cold. Dutch chuckled softly, a low, unsettling sound that sent a shiver down Elijah's spine. "I'm not asking you to sell, Mr. Carter. I'm offering you compensation. $500 cash for the woman and the children." Elijah didn't flinch, his gaze unwavering. "Not interested." Dutch's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered, his voice turning steely. "You've misunderstood, Mr. Carter. I own this territory. The judges, the marshals, they're all mine. You have no winning move here." Elijah's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't show it. "Maybe," he said, "but I'll die with a clear conscience." The words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. Dutch's expression darkened, and he took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You've made a grave mistake, Carter," he warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't understand the weight of what you're dealing with." Before Elijah could respond, Anna appeared on the porch, her face pale but resolute. Dutch's eyes locked onto her immediately, his expression shifting from calculated charm to a feral hunger. "Ah, Anna," he said, his voice laced with possessive intent. "There you are. You've been hiding, but no more. It's time to come home." Anna stood her ground, her hands shaking as she stepped forward, but her voice was steady. "Dutch," she said, her words dripping with disdain, "let them go. This is between us. Let me go, and you can have your revenge." The crowd of men behind Dutch murmured in approval, but Dutch silenced them with a single gesture. His attention never wavered from Anna. "You've always been stubborn," he said, his voice darkening. "You've never understood what I've done for you, for us." Anna's face hardened. "I never asked you for anything, Dutch. I was never yours, and I never will be." The words seemed to trigger something inside Dutch, and his eyes flashed with rage. "Then you'll watch everyone here die." He spat, the venom in his voice unmistakable. Anna took a step back, her face draining of color. The threat was real, and she knew it. Dutch wasn't a man who made idle promises. "You have until sundown, Anna," Dutch continued, his tone chilling. "Come willingly, or I'll take you over their corpses." With that, he turned and motioned for his men to begin setting up camp at the edge of the property. The psychological warfare had begun. Elijah stood in stunned silence for a moment, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He knew what was coming. He had heard the stories, seen the destruction that Dutch and his men left in their wake. And now, it was his turn to face the monster that had been chasing Anna. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Elijah called a meeting with his ranch hands. He wasn't a man who easily made decisions, but he knew what had to be done. He couldn't protect Anna and her children alone. "Cooper, you've been with me the longest," Elijah began, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "I need to know where you stand. You can leave now, and I won't hold it against you. But if you stay, I need you to understand what we're up against." Cooper, the seasoned ranch hand, didn't hesitate. "I've been with you through worse, Elijah. You're not doing this alone." The other two hands, both younger but fiercely loyal, nodded in agreement. The decision was made. They were staying, and they were going to fight. They spent the rest of the evening fortifying the ranch. Windows were barricaded, rifles were checked and rechecked, and ammunition was distributed. The ranch, once a peaceful place, had transformed into a fortress. Anna watched from a distance, her heart heavy with guilt. She had never wanted to drag anyone else into this mess, but she had no choice. Dutch had made it clear that he wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted. And Elijah, for reasons she couldn't fully understand, was determined to protect her and her children, no matter the cost. As the night settled in, the tension was almost unbearable. The wind howled through the trees, and the faintest sound of hooves reached their ears. The men on the ranch took their positions, ready for whatever was coming. Elijah found himself alone for a moment, his thoughts consumed by the danger they were all facing. He thought of Lily, his daughter, and wondered if she truly understood the gravity of the situation. She had never seen violence, never known the kind of danger that now threatened to tear their world apart. And then there was Anna. He had promised to keep her safe, but he knew promises were fragile things in a world like this. As the hours passed, the silence grew heavier. The waiting was the hardest part. And then, just before dawn, they saw them. 3 riders approaching at the ranch gate. Pike, Dutch's enforcer, was leading the way, his eyes scanning the ranch like a hawk searching for prey. The men rode with an air of casual menace, each one armed and prepared for a fight. They stopped at the gate, and Pike's voice carried over the distance. "We're just here for a little talk, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "We know Anna's here. We've got a little reward for her. Maybe we can make a deal." Elijah stood tall, refusing to show any sign of weakness. "You're not welcome here," he called back, his voice steady. Pike smirked, as if he had expected the response. "Well, that's too bad, because Mr. Calloway knows you're lying. He just wants to see if you're smart enough to change your mind." With that, the riders turned and rode off, leaving the ranch in uneasy silence. The standoff had begun, and as the sun began to rise, casting an eerie glow over the landscape, Elijah knew that the fight for their lives was only just beginning. As dawn broke, Anna stood by the window, her eyes wide with terror. "They're coming," she whispered. "Dutch has arrived with his full gang." The morning light had barely broken over the horizon when the first signs of the approaching enemy became impossible to ignore. Dutch Calloway, with his full gang, had arrived. The dozen riders thundered across the land like a storm coming to claim everything in its path, their horses kicking up dust as they neared the ranch. Elijah watched from the window of the house, his jaw clenched, his mind racing through every possible outcome. The decision to stand and fight had been made, but now that the enemy was at the gates, the weight of that choice settled heavily on his shoulders. He had promised Anna, promised her children, that they would be safe, but the reality of Dutch's arrival made him question whether that promise was enough. The ranch had become a fortress, but how long would it stand against the violent storm that was coming? The noise of the riders grew louder, and Elijah could feel the tension tightening around him. As he turned to face his men, all standing in silent preparation, he knew they were ready. Cooper, ever the loyal hand, had checked the barricades one last time, while the younger men kept their eyes sharp, watching every movement from the direction of the oncoming gang. Elijah called a final meeting, his voice steady despite the fear that threatened to surface. "Stay calm, stay sharp," he said. "They're coming for us, but we've got the advantage of home turf. We know these grounds better than they do. We fight hard, and we fight together. No one goes off on their own. If we stand together, we stand chance." The men nodded, their faces set with grim determination. Anna, meanwhile, was inside with the children, trying to keep them calm as the storm loomed closer. She couldn't bear the thought of more violence, more bloodshed. But she had seen the way Elijah was preparing, and she knew there was no turning back now. She had made the choice to stay, to trust him, even though the fear of losing everything still gnawed at her. "I'm sorry," she whispered to herself as she rocked baby Grace in her arms, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. Elijah had already lost so much, and now, it seemed, they were all on the verge of losing everything again. The riders arrived at the ranch gate shortly after, their horses stamping the ground as they came to a halt. Pike, Dutch's enforcer, dismounted first, a smirk on his face as he surveyed the ranch. Behind him, the other men stood at attention, weapons ready, their eyes scanning the property for any signs of weakness. Pike approached the gate, his boots crunching in the dirt, and raised his hand in a mock gesture of peace. "Mr. Carter," he called out, his voice too calm, too pleased with himself. "We need to have a little talk." Elijah stepped forward, his hand resting on the rifle slung across his shoulder. "There's nothing to talk about," he replied, his voice strong. "This ranch is under my protection, and I'm not letting you or your boss take anyone here." Pike's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He took a few steps closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied Elijah. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" Pike said, his voice low and threatening. "I don't know if that's courage or stupidity, but either way, you're in a bad position. Mr. Calloway doesn't like being made a fool of, and you're making him look foolish. You should have just handed over Anna and her kids. Now you're going to pay for your pride." Elijah didn't flinch, but his heart raced. He had heard the stories of Dutch Calloway's cruelty, of how he destroyed anyone who dared stand against him. But Elijah had never been one to back down from a fight, especially not when innocent lives were at stake. "I'm not handing over anyone," Elijah said, his voice as cold as the winter air. "You want Anna? You'll have to come through me first." Pike's eyes darkened with anger, and he took a step forward, raising a hand to signal his men. The tension in the air was thick, the quiet before the storm so suffocating that it seemed as though time itself had slowed. "I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing," Pike warned. "Come out here, hand her over, and we'll leave without incident. No bloodshed, no mess. Just a nice, clean transaction." Elijah's hand tightened around the rifle, but he didn't move. "I don't think you understand," he said slowly. "There's no deal to be made here. If you want her, you'll have to kill me first." Pike's face twisted with fury, and he spat on the ground. "You're a damn fool," he muttered, before turning and gesturing to the rest of the gang. "Let's do this the hard way, then." Elijah's men quickly took their positions, rifles aimed and ready. Cooper, the most experienced of the ranch hands, moved to the front, while the others positioned themselves around the house, covering every exit. The barricades were holding, but Elijah knew they wouldn't last long. The first shots rang out, echoing through the still morning air as Dutch's men fired on the ranch. Elijah and his men returned fire, the sounds of gunshots mingling with the cries of the wind. The battle had begun. At first, the ranch hands held their ground. The men from Dutch's gang, though numerous, were scattered and disorganized as they tried to find cover. Elijah's group was far more cohesive, more practiced in their defense of the ranch. But it wasn't long before Dutch's men began to push forward, their numbers overwhelming the defenses. Elijah watched as one of his men, Jim, was hit in the shoulder, a loud cry escaping his lips as he fell to the ground. Cooper rushed to his side, pulling him out of the line of fire, but Elijah knew they were losing ground. The ranch was under siege, and they were outnumbered. But Elijah wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the ranch became a battlefield, a place where everything Elijah had worked for was on the line. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, and the sound of gunfire became a constant hum in his ears. Through the chaos, Elijah could hear Anna's voice, calling out to her children as she tried to shield them from the violence. He could hear Thomas's cries, the boy frightened but determined, not wanting to be hidden away in the cellar while his mother fought for her life. And in that moment, Elijah made a vow. He would not let this family fall. He would not let Dutch Calloway tear them apart. As the first wave of Dutch's men continued to press forward, Elijah knew the worst was yet to come. But he was ready. He had made his promise, and he intended to keep it, no matter the cost. Just as Elijah braced for the next assault, the sound of approaching hooves reached his ears. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, his figure barely visible against the brightening sky. Elijah squinted, his heart pounding in his chest. Who was it, and what did they bring with them? The days after the siege were filled with a quiet that felt foreign, almost too still for the damage that had been done. Elijah stood at the porch of the house, staring out over the land. The ranch that had once been a place of peace now marked by the scars of the battle that had raged through it. The fight was over, but the aftermath weighed heavily on his shoulders. The men had done their best to fortify the ranch, but it had come at a cost. One of Elijah's ranch hands, Jim, had been killed in the battle, and the pain of his loss was a constant ache in Elijah's heart. They buried Jim with what little ceremony they could manage, the others standing in a somber line as they paid their respects. The town, when it learned of what had happened, reacted in mixed ways. Some came to offer condolences, others to question Elijah's decision to take in Anna and her children. There were those who saw him as a hero, standing up to Dutch Calloway and his gang, but there were also whispers of judgment. He brought this trouble to our doorstep, some said. Now look at what it's cost us. Elijah didn't care for their judgment. He hadn't done what he did for praise. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. But the loss of Jim, the fear in Anna's eyes, and the questions still hanging in the air made him wonder if he had made the right choice. He had promised Anna and her children's safety, but the price of that promise had been high. Inside, Anna was struggling in her own way. She spent the early days after the battle in a kind of numb silence, the trauma of the siege still fresh in her mind. Her hands trembled as she held baby Grace, and her eyes were often distant, as though she was reliving the horrors of the past few days. She hadn't been able to sleep, waking up every night in a cold sweat, the sounds of gunfire still ringing in her ears. It was clear that she was haunted not just by the memory of the violence, but by the guilt she carried. "I'm sorry," Anna whispered one evening, sitting by the fire with Elijah, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have left when you told me to. I brought this danger to your door." Elijah's heart ached for her. He could see the weight she carried, the burden of guilt she couldn't shake. "You didn't bring anything here," he said gently. "Dutch Calloway brought this danger with him, and we faced it together. You didn't do this, Anna." But she wasn't convinced. "I should have protected them better. Thomas, Grace." Her voice cracked as she looked down at her children, who were now sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the violence that had nearly torn their world apart. Elijah's hand found hers, and he squeezed it gently. "You're doing everything you can," he said. "You've been through hell, but you're still here. You're still standing. That's more than most people can say." It was a small comfort, but it was all he had to offer. The days slowly turned into weeks, and though the ranch was still scarred from the battle, life began to return to it. The farm animals needed tending to, the crops needed planting, and the ranch hands had their work cut out for them. But the work was healing. The rhythm of the days, the steady motion of caring for the land and animals, gave everyone a sense of purpose. Elijah, for all the grief in his heart, found solace in the work. His mind couldn't linger on the losses for too long. or he'd lose himself to them completely. And so he worked side by side with his men, with Anna, with Lily, and with Thomas, trying to push past the shadows of the siege. Anna, too, began to find her place in the routine. She helped with the cooking, took care of baby Grace, and spent hours with Lily, teaching her how to care for the animals. Slowly, the connection between her and the children grew, especially with Thomas. The bond they shared was undeniable. He had always seen her as a protector, and in turn, she began to see herself as a mother figure, not just to him, but to all of them. It wasn't easy for Anna to open up, to let go of the fears that clung to her. But with each passing day, she found herself trusting the family that had taken her in. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since before James had died. It was a form of therapy, a way to express what words couldn't. She painted a mural in the children's room, the first time in months that she had allowed herself to feel something other than fear. The painting was simple, but beautiful. A mother and her children, standing together, their faces filled with hope and strength. It was a reflection of Anna's own journey, a journey she had never thought she would be on, but one she now found herself walking willingly. As the days passed, Elijah and Anna grew closer. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged in the fires of survival. They shared quiet moments together, exchanging stories about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Elijah spoke of his late wife, Sarah, and how he had never imagined that he would love again. He had thought that part of his life was over, that the pain of losing her would never fade. But then Anna and her children had come into his life, and everything had changed. He had found something worth fighting for again, something worth protecting. Anna, in turn, shared her own story, though she was hesitant at first. She spoke of James, of their life before Dutch and his gang had come into the picture. She spoke of the dreams she had once had, of the things she had wanted to do before everything had been taken from her. "I used to paint," she told him one evening, her voice soft as she looked at the mural she had created. "I wanted to be an artist. I never thought I'd be in a place like this." Elijah nodded, his eyes understanding. "We all have dreams," he said. "Some of them get lost along the way, but it's never too late to find them again." The words lingered in the air, and for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences felt lighter. They didn't need to say anything else. They both understood. They had both been broken in different ways, but together they had the chance to heal. Meanwhile, life at the ranch continued to move forward. Thomas, though still haunted by the violence he had witnessed, was slowly adjusting to his new reality. He spent his days helping Elijah with the animals, learning the ways of the ranch, and taking care of baby Grace when Anna needed a break. Lily, too, was adjusting, though she still had nightmares sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night with fear in her eyes. But Elijah would hold her, reassure her, and she would drift back to sleep. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Elijah found himself lost in thought, his mind wandering to the future. He had promised Anna safety, but there was always a part of him that wondered what the future held. Would Dutch Calloway come back? Would the law come after Anna again? Or would they finally be free to live without fear? It was a question that lingered in the back of his mind, but for now, he had his family, and he would protect them at all costs. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch began to feel more like home. The scars of the siege, though still present, were beginning to heal. The house was alive with laughter again, the sound of children playing, the clink of dishes, the hum of life returning. But the journey wasn't over. Anna still had her doubts, her fears, her guilt. She wasn't sure where she belonged, or if she would ever truly feel safe again. And Elijah, though he had found something worth protecting, still carried the weight of his past with him. But for the first time in a long time, they had hope. They had each other. As Elijah stood outside, watching the sun set over the ranch, he caught sight of a rider on the horizon. A lone figure, moving slowly, as if coming to deliver news. His heart skipped a beat. Was it someone from the town? A messenger? Or was it someone who had come to bring more trouble? The rider grew closer, and Elijah's grip on his rifle tightened. What did they bring with them? And what would it mean for the future of their new family? The days following the siege continued to unfold with a weight of recovery and unspoken tension between Anna and Elijah. Life at the ranch had settled into a new rhythm, one filled with hard work, shared moments, and an understanding that they had all endured something that could never truly be erased. But beneath the surface, a quiet undercurrent of change was flowing. Elijah could feel it every time he looked at Anna. There was something unspoken between them, a connection that had been born in the heat of battle, something deeper than shared survival. Yet, despite the closeness they had found, the fear still lingered in Anna's eyes. It was the kind of fear that had followed her since the death of her husband, James, and the threat of Dutch Calloway. That fear wasn't just for herself anymore. It was for the children, for the life she had started to build here, and for Elijah. She had never imagined she would find herself in a place like this, in a family like this. But even now, after everything they had been through, she couldn't help but wonder if it was all too good to be true. That evening, after dinner, Elijah found Anna sitting on the porch, gazing out into the distance, her mind clearly elsewhere. The wind had died down, leaving the world quiet and still. He could see the weight she carried, the shadows of the past still clinging to her like a shroud. Elijah walked up quietly, his boots barely making a sound on the porch. "Anna," he said softly, his voice laced with concern. She turned her head, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, there was a flash of vulnerability. "Elijah," she whispered, her voice tired but warm. "It's just hard sometimes. I look at them, Thomas, Grace, and I can't help but wonder if I'm the right one to be their mother. I'm not perfect. I'm broken. I'm scared." Elijah knelt beside her, his heart aching as he took her hand in his. "I'm scared too," he admitted quietly. "I've lost before, and I've learned that nothing is guaranteed. But I know this. You're the best thing that's happened to them. You're exactly what they need." Anna's eyes filled with unshed tears as she looked at him, her heart torn between the fear of loving and the desire for something more. "I don't know if I can trust this," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "What if I lose them? What if I lose you?" Elijah squeezed her hand gently, his eyes soft with understanding. "You don't have to trust it right now," he said, his voice steady. "Just stay. Let it become real. Let us become real." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had been through, everything he had lost, and everything he now stood to gain. Anna stared at him for a long moment, as if searching his face for any sign of uncertainty. But there was none. Elijah had given her his promise, his heart, and in that moment, Anna realized that she didn't have to face the fear alone. "I'll stay," she whispered, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. For now, the relief that flooded Elijah's chest was immediate and all-consuming. He had known all along that Anna was the answer to the loneliness he had felt since losing Sarah, but hearing her say the words made it real. And in that moment, something shifted between them, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. But Elijah knew that wasn't enough. Not anymore. He had lived through enough heartbreak to understand that sometimes you had to take a leap to step forward with no guarantees. And so, that evening, he decided to make the leap. He spent the entire day preparing, trying to make everything perfect. It wasn't much, just a simple dinner by the fire, with the kids sent off to a neighbor's house for a few hours. But it was enough. He needed to tell her how he felt. As the sun set and the fire crackled softly in the hearth, Elijah sat down at the table, his heart racing. Anna walked in, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders, her eyes a little brighter than they had been before. She smiled at him, the warmth in her expression making his heart swell. "You made dinner?" she asked, her voice laced with surprise. Elijah grinned. "Not exactly. Let's just say the biscuits are a bit burnt and the stew's a little oversalted, but I tried. Anna laughed softly, the sound like a balm to his soul. It's the thought that counts, she said as she sat down across from him. Elijah reached for her hand, his nerves suddenly overwhelming him. Anna, he said, his voice a little rough. I've never been good with words, but I need you to know something. I'm not asking you to replace Sarah, and I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to be with me, to be here with me and the kids. Anna's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying, Elijah? She whispered, her voice filled with both hope and fear. Elijah took a deep breath and pulled out a ring from his pocket, holding it out to her. I'm asking you to be my wife, he said simply. Not because you have to, not because of anything else, but because I want you. I want this family, with you at the center of it. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the ring, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected this, not in a million years. But as she looked up at Elijah, she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that mirrored her own. She saw a man who had been broken and was now offering her a future together. Elijah, she began, her voice shaking. I don't know if I can do this. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. Elijah interrupted her softly. Neither of us is perfect, Anna, but we've got something that's real, something worth fighting for. He paused, his hand trembling slightly as he held the ring out to her. You don't have to say yes tonight, but I need you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Anna looked down at the ring, her mind racing. She had spent so long running, so long hiding from the pain and the fear, but here, in this moment, with Elijah offering her a future, she felt the walls around her heart begin to crack. Slowly, she reached out and took the ring from his hand. Yes, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. Elijah's face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring on her finger. It wasn't the grandest of proposals, nor the most extravagant, but it was theirs, and it felt like everything she had ever needed. As he pulled her into a tight embrace, their lips met in a kiss, soft, tentative, but full of promise. The fire crackled in the background, the warmth of the flames matching the warmth in their hearts. And for the first time in a long time, Anna felt like she was home. The next day, the news of their engagement spread like wildfire. The townspeople, who had once whispered about Anna, now looked at her with respect. The judgment had faded, replaced by admiration for the woman who had stood strong in the face of so much adversity. Elijah and Anna's wedding was simple, but it was perfect. A small ceremony at the ranch, with only a few close friends and neighbors in attendance. Thomas, now 7, proudly gave Anna away, dressed in his best suit, and Lily stood beside her, holding her hand with a protective fierceness that made Anna's heart swell with love. The vows were simple, heartfelt, and true. Elijah promised to protect Anna, not because she needed it, but because he wanted to. Anna promised to trust him, even when fear told her not to. And when the pastor asked who brought these families together, Thomas and Lily, their voices full of certainty, answered together, "We do." The reception was small but filled with laughter, food, and music. The community, once divided, now celebrated the union of Elijah and Anna, a union that had been forged in the fires of survival and was now strengthened by love. As the night drew to a close, Elijah and Anna stood outside, their arms around each other, gazing at the stars. You ever think about that day? Anna asked, her voice soft. When we showed up at your barn, if you turned us away? Elijah smiled, his eyes filled with the warmth of the life they had built. I didn't though, he said, his voice steady. Then I'd still be half alive, going through motions. And in that moment, they both knew that they had found something worth living for. The journey wasn't over. They still had a future to build, challenges to face, and more love to give. But for the first time, they had a family. And together, they could face whatever came next. 1 year later, the ranch thrived, the family grew, and Dutch Calloway's shadow was a distant memory. As Elijah watched his children play in the yard, he knew that they had built something that would last, something that was theirs, something worth protecting. And when Thomas, now a little older, looked up at him with a question in his eyes, Elijah knew that the future was already here. "Pa, when a new baby comes, will you love him more than me?" Elijah pulled Thomas close, his heart full. "I couldn't love any child more than I love you. My heart just got bigger, that's all." As the family stood together, the world seemed right, and the journey they had started so long ago felt like it had come full circle. And in that moment, Elijah knew that love, real, unconditional love, was worth dying for. "Over my dead body," for words that changed everything. And as the sun set on the ranch, Elijah, Anna, Thomas, and Lily stood together, stronger than ever, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side.